Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever part of the world that you're watching from. And welcome to Biodiversity, Human Rights, and Climate Adaptation, a talk show brought to you by Human Right to Water, live here from the World Water Week in Stockholm. My name is Hajia Kubi, and I will be your host during this 20-minute talk show. So from me to you, a very warm welcome, whether you're watching online or whether you're here in the room with us in Sweden. It's amazing to see you all today because we have an important topic to discuss, because we all know that biodiversity is a cornerstone to a healthy ecosystem, but it's also a silent enabler of water security, food systems, and climate resilience, but oftentimes overlooked in legal frameworks and in policy. Without biodiversity, there is no clean water, no functional ecosystems, and no real climate adaptation. And that is why this talk show is diving deeper into the question about should there be a human right to biodiversity? And if so, what would that mean for law, for policy, and collective action on the ground? This discussion does come at a very timely moment because the world has already recognized the human right to water and the right to a healthy environment. But the question remains whether we can do the same for biodiversity, since it is a vital precondition to both. So I'm very delighted that we have a stellar panel of experts here with us in the room to help uncover that question. So first of all, I would say a very warm welcome to Amanda Luffe, who's the CEO of Human Right to Water. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Then we also have Dr. Alejandro Itza, who is the director of the Environmental Law Center at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Warm welcome to you also, Alejandro.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Jennifer Molwantwa, who is the CEO of the South African Water Research Commission. Warm welcome to you.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
And fans in the room in Sweden, as we can see. Well, that's a promising start to this section. I'm very excited to uncover this.
Very
So,
excited.
Amanda, if I could maybe start with you. There is already a human right to water, and we also have a human right to a healthy environment. Why do you see the need also to have a separate human right for biodiversity?
That's a really good question. I get asked that quite a lot, and it is recognised in international conventions and international law, but it's scattered around.
Yeah.
There isn't one place where you can find the human rights aspects of biodiversity, and it has an impact on so many different things, especially for vulnerable people in terms of access to food, access to water, as you mentioned earlier on, and therefore very related to other human rights.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it doesn't get the same priority that other human rights do. So there isn't enough going on to actually protect biodiversity, and yet it is essential to all those other human rights.
Right.
So we need to find a way of elevating its status. So that's really where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so indeed it is a precondition to both and a priority that we're then overlooking oftentimes.
Yeah.
Alejandro, if I can go to that, I mean, from IUCN's perspective, you're obviously interested in protecting biodiversity based on your mission, really to like engage and influence and assist societies in conserving nature. So how do you see the human right to biodiversity as a support, so to say, for that mission?
Thank you. Yesterday I was listening to a presentation in which it was said that biodiversity is very close in certain societies to people, especially in the Big South. And I think that elevating biodiversity to the level of a right, it will bring it closer to people everywhere around the world, not only in the Big South. So I think it will, at the end of the day, close that gap that we still have between, biodiversity and people, how important biodiversity is for people. Because if it is a right, it is an entitlement of us all. And I think in that sense, it will certainly help for the whole world, to make sure, to make the case of biodiversity to be much more central to what it is
you
now.
would really be elevating citizen
Absolutely.
engagement in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a precursor for movemental change, so to say. That's a really good one. Jennifer, if I can go to you next. I mean, I'd love to hear a bit more about the work also that you guys do, because, I mean, the South Africa Water Research Commission, it's really centered around supporting, water research, development, innovation in that sense. So could you speak a bit more how WRC is also like supporting and working with communities to sort of like enable them to contribute to water ecosystems and biodiversity management and protection?
Thank you very much, and afternoon. I think it's very much important, the issue of biodiversity. In South Africa right now, while we have environment and water, in our constitution as a right, and biodiversity is linked to water. In the current administration, our president has even elevated the issues of water, biodiversity, and environment as a priority in South Africa. So our Minister of Water and Sanitation, who's here with us today, is actually also having to spearhead that. And in South Africa also, biodiversity, I mean, rural South Africa is the biggest part of South Africa. We always mostly focus on cities and urban areas, but our country is really sparse wide and has got a lot of rural areas.
Yeah.
And in terms of culturally speaking as well, there's a lot of culture that is linked to biodiversity, to our wetlands, to our birds, to our, animals in the rivers. So it's very much important. But the work of the WRC as well expands from research innovation. We work a lot with communities to ensure that they understand the importance, the protection, and all of this then gets escalated and then informs policy and decision making in South Africa.
Right, which is like at the very basis of what we need.
Yes.
You sort of like already alluded to the interlinkages between water, biodiversity, human rights. I mentioned it at the start. Going to you, Amanda, I mean, your organization, it's called Human Right to Water. That's your mission, is to protect that. How is biodiversity connected, so to say, to that right to water in your perspective?
Well, if you think about the human right to water, it's about accessibility and it's also about quality of the water.
Right.
And I was discussing this earlier with Alejandro, and he said, I don't think you can have water without biodiversity. It actually is an essential part. And we just don't understand the whole ecosystem well enough as individuals to really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I also think from a quality point of view that if you have biodiversity, you know the water is good quality because otherwise animals and plants can't survive.
Yeah.
So it's a marker. So you've got it from both ends. Water security long term. Obviously, our mission is water for drinking, but you can't have drinking water without a secure sort of water supply in the long term.
Yeah, that really, it's like one cannot exist without the other, so that's why they're so fundamentally reliant also on each other.
Yeah.
So I see there what the interlinkage is. I mean, if I hear all of this, I would say we need to get our gears ready, do more to protect biodiversity. So Alejandro, can I ask you the million-dollar question? What are the main resistance or barriers that we see then right now that are sort of like preventing us from fully, putting all our efforts to the conservation of biodiversity?
If I be frank with you, is the main concept of biodiversity. So what is biodiversity in itself? What does it entail? Are we talking about nature? Are we talking about genes? Are we talking about species? Are we talking about ecosystems? What is biodiversity? Are we talking about conservation? Are we talking about restoration? So I still think that we need to do a lot more on that. So how can you care about something that you do not fully understand?
Right.
So the concept of biodiversity is well understood among those that work in the field of biodiversity and nature conservation.
Yeah.
But some people do not really know what we are talking about. And I think this is one of the main barriers that we need to overcome.
Issue.
Absolutely.
That's not what I would have expected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is an international legal framework. There are national legal frameworks. There are policies, laws. But still, you need to disentangle the meaning of biodiversity.
Right.
Before going into all these sectors that have different, interests in terms of biodiversity and the environment, I think we still need to do a lot about that.
Yeah, because once we can define what it is that we're in a harmonized way addressing, then we can take collective action. Is that what you're saying?
There you are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, hearing all of this, Jennifer, if I could go to you, would you, as a research organization, because I think that lens is particularly interesting in this entire, so to say, discussion and conversation, would you as a research organization support the human right to biodiversity? And also I'm curious to know, you already spoke a little bit to sort of like the wide array of biodiversity in South Africa, but how can you see a human right to biodiversity also being able to address some of the pressing water challenges that South Africa is facing?
I always say we must never forget to talk about indigenous knowledge systems. I come from, and I spoke about rural South Africa. It's trustlands. They are under the leadership of traditional leaders. And without having documented it, biodiversity is central and it's well protected. Now, what is needed is really education and awareness and making sure that we bring the community and make them centrally a part of the solution.
Right.
What you talk about in South Africa, it's around citizen science, and there's a lot of work that we do as the Water Research Commission there, in terms of also developing some of the quality monitoring tools, such as our SES, mini SES. We even, send it around to the schools, because you need to educate and make aware from an early age, and then broader to society and the community, for them to be able to take care of biodiversity.
That's a really strong one. So you're saying indigenous knowledge is something that we cannot overlook, and in general, education and knowledge already at an early age is what we need to sort of like make sure that people also fundamentally understand the importance. That's on the education and knowledge side. I'm curious to hear from you, Amanda. What would you say is needed in order to sort of like help policymakers integrate biodiversity into national legislature?
I think it goes back to what Alejandro was saying about understanding what it means and having clear guidance on how you would integrate it. It's a very, very complicated area. And if I think about the right to water, that's also very complicated. There are so many elements required to meet that protection of human rights. It's the same with biodiversity. So we need to translate what's out there in terms of laws into something potentially in one place that could enable. Once you have a recognition in the Constitution, what does that mean, and how do you roll that out at a national level?
Okay, let's say we play that out for a little bit, right? So let's assume it's there. Alejandro, if I can go to you, how would you see in front of you like that the idea of a human right to biodiversity could be a beneficial legal instrument to protect aquatic, so to say, biodiversity, or protect natural sort of like water systems? Like, can you play out what the benefits would then be of such an instrument?
Sure. The moment in which you have an entitlement, an individual one, a collective one. We're talking about indigenous peoples, as Jennifer has said. You have a right, the entitlement of this piece, this ecosystem, this species to be protected. And yet I think this is the conduit through which I see the right to biodiversity as a way or as a mean for biodiversity to be protected. But at the same time, I would like to see also the other side of the coin. Not only people's rights to biodiversity to be protected, but biodiversity in itself, or the ecosystems in themselves, as subjects of rights to be protected, which is the other side of the coin.
Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So you might have seen probably, and in many jurisdictions, in the Big South, but also in the North, the idea of the rights of nature is gaining traction. In other words, that you have ecosystems or species in themselves being entitled to be recognized as subjects of rights. So, and I think we need to move that envelope a bit further down so that we really get that recognized in as many constitutions as possible. So
right
that we,
in itself.
Absolutely. As right holders, as we human beings. And then we will close that gap completely.
That's such a fundamentally interesting, also completely different outlook on it, right? Because it's not like what do we as humans sort of like have a right to, but who is a right holder in itself, which entities also. That is the game changer. Cool. I mean, I like this sort of like the concreteness here. So maybe following in that line, Jennifer, if I could go to you, can you share maybe like just to also like exemplify for us some of WRC's projects that really like can show how biodiversity can contribute towards food and water security?
Definitely. I mean, we know that the water quality services played by, for example, your plants that grow in the rivers, right? For a bioaccumulation point of view, and making sure that downstream users do get assimilative capacity that's provided, which means that the water downstream will be the resource downstream is cleaner. It's very much important in the work that we do, particularly around water reuse and reclamation, because that's an idea also that's very complex. But if we don't have the markers, like Amanda said, if we don't have the markers to show what kind of quality is there, the water boards, which then abstract the water and treat it, have got to struggle, and the costs are escalating on a year-on-year basis. Therefore, the kind of work that we do on reclamation.
And what does that look like for vulnerable communities specifically?
Vulnerable communities, obviously, they will have your villages, will have your stock animals at home, your domestic animals. That's what they use. And in areas where there isn't even water that's reticulated. That is their primary source of water. That is the primary source of water for even cultural practices like baptism and other cultural practices that are there within our communities. So the work that we do, for example, around desilting, there's a big program, Nut Silt program, where we're also saying, you know, as the silt is moving around within the rivers, how do we remove it to make sure that, you know, you're still providing the necessary turbidity, light penetration for your fish and other biodiversity aspects within the ecosystem.
That sort of like goes to show how important it is also, and specifically in the community context examples that you gave. Amanda, if I could go to you, what would you say, what would the ideal outcome be if there was a right to biodiversity adopted globally?
I'd like to see a combination of practical action mixed with governance, because you can't, without the governance piece of it, it's not sustainable. It should be more nature-based solutions and looking at the quality of the water as a result. The biodiversity is going to help us to sustain both of those things. And there needs to be some kind of long-term strategy thinking in government planning to make sure that there's a holistic view around biodiversity and how it can support nature and water quality.
Yeah, in an overall sense, for sure. Alejandro, I see you nodding already. So I wanted to ask, what would you say are some of the collective actions that we need to, you know, turn this around, make sure that we turn this idea also into reality?
Correct. So I will say reality will mean for me implementation.
Yes, for sure.
So we move from recognition of the right to biodiversity, as we've been discussing, into implementation. And there is no magic formula for that. So you need to, first of all, as I said at the beginning, we need to make sure that people understand what biodiversity is. We need to make sure that people understand, society at large understands what the right to biodiversity means in practical terms. So, and for that, as I said, there is no formula, perfect formula. I would say we need a big debate that involves all levels of societies. We need decision makers around that. We need policy makers. We need researchers. We need academia. We need the judiciary there, because at the end of the day, they will have to find, you know, the answers when there will be conflicts in terms of implementing the legislation. So we need the society at large, really, to understand and to be sensitized and capacitated to a certain extent, at least in those sectors where it is not such capacity, so that this right moves from being a piece of paper into something concrete to be implemented.
That's a really good one. Jennifer, if I can go to you, what kind of partnerships between government, civil society, and the private sector do you think are needed to turn this into reality?
And before I get to the partnerships, I think from a governance perspective, monitoring and evaluation is going to be very much important. What we report on around accountability as government departments and different areas of authority, I think monitoring and evaluation becomes very much important. But the kind of partnerships that we have is really to bring society onto the table. You know, society is also researchers, and it has taken us a long time to realize that, like I talked about knowledge systems, but the partnerships between society, between researchers within the laboratories, you need to test the ideas with society and see what is their feel, what is their understanding, because also their own experiences must contribute towards the legislation and the policies, that because as part of implementation as well, they will have certain responsibilities towards implementation. It's not going to be a government, a president, or a minister. It has to be society and a holistic approach, therefore bringing them in. But I also want to say, you know, in my country right now, we are going through a process, we're having a dialogue where we are talking about our challenges. And I think this conversation also is what we will input in towards the dialogue to say, not only should we talk about our policies, our economy, but also let's talk about nature, let's talk about biodiversity and people and how we protect that and make sure that, you know, there is water security. As a result of that, there'll be food security at the very core.
And that's so important, and it touches so much upon what you said earlier about raising awareness, having education and knowledge already at a young age, and then including everyone society brought in those conversations. Finally, Amanda, to you, I would also like to ask the same question, because one thing is clear, you've made all three of you have made such a strong case about the importance of it. So what would you say are the kinds of partnerships between government, civil society, private sector that we need to really get this into practice?
Well, I would endorse both of the other speakers, Alejandro and Jennifer, in terms of looking at the whole governance picture and also society. And also, I'd like to build on the fact that we need a local level as well. And I think you alluded to that earlier with the citizen science program that South Africa's promoting, getting people involved so that they understand. And we're not just telling them what to do, but helping to educate and get people involved.
Yeah.
And so the community level and the local level is really important as well.
Yeah. I want to thank you all so much because, I mean, at the very heart of it, what all three of you have said is the importance of, you know, spreading this message and seeing this as something that we collectively in action mode need to do all together. So not waiting for just one party, not waiting for just one actor to do it. And just by sharing, I think the importance of it, how foundational it is, how interconnected all these systems are, I think you've already contributed a very important step in that journey. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to thank all of our audiences for joining us online, and of course the audience that we have here in Stockholm also for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.